Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Abby Desrochers. I teach biology here at West High School. Thank you so much, Principal Higgins, for inviting me to speak at this quarter's staff meeting about AI in the classroom. I do have a few slides here that I'm going to talk through, and they are really focusing on how AI can be used in the classroom in terms of assessing our students. So not only will we be covering the importance of assessment in general, but also how we can leverage these large language models, or AI, in order to create assessments and save us, the teachers, time. For the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to be using what I know to be the two most popular LLMs, that is, again, large language models, that we have widely available to us. That is ChatGPT and Claude. I will say that I am much more familiar with ChatGPT as it has been around a lot longer. However, I am getting used to Claude, and for this purpose, assume that they are essentially the same type of technology. So without further ado, here is my presentation, AI at School, leveraging information generated by large language models to support classroom assessment. And again, we're going to be focusing on ChatGPT and Claude, and really pulling from two key thinkers in this field, Chapuis and Stiggins, their 2017 textbook, An Introduction to Student-Involved Assessment for Learning. And here I did include a diagram from Chapuis and Stiggins that very succinctly outlines what they find to be the keys to quality assessment, and I do happen to agree. So just to go over them quickly, we need to ensure that an assessment has clear purpose, clear targets, the design needs to be sound, that is, it makes sense, it is easily digestible, and lastly, an assessment needs to have effective communication. Students need to be able to understand why it is they are taking this assessment. Conversely, teachers need to be able to explain why that is. So, to touch a bit on what assessment is and the benefits of it, again, keeping in mind the 4 keys to the quality assessments, we know that teachers are able to gain a lot from assessments. They are able to diagnose student achievement levels via summative assessments, really gain insight into how they are doing day to day with formative assessments. And they can use this insight to revise plans for subsequent lessons, maybe for that year, maybe even for the next school year. Assessments can also be really helpful for students because they can, of course, inform what their grades are, and they can also really help to give students a basis for where they are and where they can set goals for next steps. How exactly are teachers to design an assessment? Luckily, each state publishes a list of core content standards. The Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has publicly listed each content standard framework for each subject area in school. For teachers, content standards really serve as a roadmap to guide students from the beginning of the school year to the end in terms of what they are responsible for knowing. That is, from start to finish, with all various checkpoints in between. Looking at the current frameworks that are published in Massachusetts on the right-hand side, I will be using the 2016 Science and Technology Engineering Framework for the rest of this presentation to exemplify how assessments can be generated using AI. One undeniable fact is that Claude and ChatGPT are widely available, and they are really useful because they're actually able to adapt their output based on us, the end user's feedback. So I will be providing an example of how a teacher could tailor this type of feedback to make it even more useful for their classroom. But for now, I want to know and show you guys how to answer this question. How can we preserve the important qualities of assessment while leveraging the usefulness of AI for classroom assessment? Again, here are those 4 keys to quality assessment from Chapuis and Stiggins that we want to keep in mind, as this will be our guidelines for determining the output of ChatGPT and its usefulness. So, the first step in determining how you can use AI for your assessments is to identify the learning target that you want to focus on. That is, what piece of information do you want to test the student's mastery of? These learning targets are often just pulled from the content standards published by the state, and they are often very complex and contain multiple propositions, that is, pieces of information that students are responsible for. And that's all to say that sometimes it may be useful to break up these learning targets into smaller steps in order to assess those granular details in order to know that a student has mastered a rather nebulous concept. So I'm going to use first the general content standard provided by Massachusetts, and then demonstrate how I would break that down into a proposition to be able to ask ChatGPT to generate an artifact for me. So the example I've chosen comes from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, High School Life Sciences Department. Use a model that illustrates the roles of photosynthesis, cellular respiration, decomposition, and combustion to explain the cycling of carbon in its various forms among the biosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and geosphere. Like I mentioned, learning targets can include multiple concepts within it, and it is a good idea to break them down into propositions to assess for that specific target. So in this case, I may separately assess mastery of each concept, that is photosynthesis, cellular respiration, etc., before assessing students' reasoning ability to explain how those concepts relate to the overlying carbon cycling. Once you have identified your learning target, you're going to just want to keep in mind how to keep that assessment sound, that design. So you're going to want to determine the best assessment type. Should it be selected response, a student product? I like to think that the recipe for the ideal input for a large language model is a clear learning target plus awareness of sound design. So, again, I included the full text of our learning standard that we are going to use as an example, but for our specific ChatGPT input, our learning target is going to be students will be able to explain the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So again, just some context for us, those are both an inverse process of one another that occurs between plants and other living organisms. So I want to determine how ChatGPT can be useful in assessing student mastery of such a concept. My input into ChatGPT, step 3, I asked it to create a classroom activity sheet for a high school biology class specifically to investigate the difference between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, the output given by ChatGPT was honestly surprisingly quite helpful. As we can see here, going from left to right, we have kind of the different parts that it broke itself down into. It created a worksheet type of activity for students. This leftmost screenshot of ChatGPT includes a section for students to identify their name, their date, and what class it is. And something very interesting that I found was that ChatGPT included an interactive diagram which kind of explains the relationship between the levels of CO2, water, and light and how it would affect a plant. Now, this is really interesting. It is not an assessment tool, but it is a reference for students to be able to use to inform their decisions when taking the assessment, which is interactive. It's something I have not really encountered, but I am quite impressed. Looking through the different parts 1 through 5 that we are given by ChatGPT, we did not specify which type of assessment we would want. We just said a worksheet style assessment. So we were given part 1, a table for students to fill out whether the purpose of photosynthesis and respiration. I do find this to be quite nebulous, so I'm not sure that part 1 I would include in an assessment. Part 2 asks students to identify whether the process explained is associated with photosynthesis or cellular respiration. I think this one honestly does test students' ability to think critically, differentiating between the two concepts, knowing which specific process is associated with which. I especially like part 4, the critical thinking questions, asking how they really do relate to one another, and more on that later. But again, we were also given some examples of creating a flow diagram and even a sample exit ticket. So I did mention that I was a fan of the critical thinking section that ChatGPT did provide to me, and I thought maybe this could be tailored a bit more. One great thing about ChatGPT and LLMs is that they are able to adapt their feedback based on our input to better, complement what we are asking it to do. So here, I modified my input a bit. I said, "Thank you. I really appreciate the critical thinking portion you provided. Could you please expand upon that section using 3 multiple choice questions?" So ChatGPT was pretty successful at doing this, in my opinion. It was able to maintain that critical thinking requirement necessary for students to be able to answer these questions, and even was able to generate a different type of assessment that is multiple choice for me to provide to the students. So again, that was just one example of how we can preserve the important qualities of assessment while leveraging the usefulness of AI. As I mentioned, it is crucial that the teacher does tailor that output given by ChatGPT to ensure that there are no nonsensical bits of information being given to the students. It is fully the responsibility of the educator to understand how to be skeptical of ChatGPT in order to demonstrate its ethical use for its classroom and for the students that they serve.